Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment discussion with Jump. And this week we have a special guest, Neil Carberry, the head of the REC. And before Neil gets stuck into some of the questions that we have for him, I want to give some industry stats. The market we know is a little bit in turmoil at the moment. There's some confusion depending on whether you're gathering or where you're gathering your information from. So we've got some stats from some very usual places and some interesting places. So Manpower put a big report out saying 70% of the employers report difficulty in finding role. It's 17-year high in the difficulty of finding roles. The hardest areas are globally. IT and data have the highest demand for roles with 27%, sales and marketing at 22%, but customer facing and front office at 17%. But filling the skills gaps, clients are upskilling and reskilling their workforce. So 71% are doing that. 51% plan on hiring more perm people. 43% are investing in tech, and 37% will bring in more temps and more contractors. Plus 57% of the clients they talked to were offering flexibility, 33% are increasing wages, and 33% are looking at new talent pools to attract candidates from. So if you read last week's newsletter, if you can't find it, it's go to our Jump page and find it on our Jump page, or go to the REC and find the REC report, because we took the stuff from the ONS, and what they were saying was in April to June 2023, the estimated numbers of vacancies fell by 85,000, which apparently is the 12th month on the trot that it's fallen. However, vacancies are still above the million mark. However, if you look at that, the vacancies have dropped by 85,000, but the vacancies compared to January and March 2020 are 232,000 up. So if we think it's a bad marketplace, it is nearly 250,000 vacancies up on where we were before the pandemic. Hours worked in the last quarter have gone up, so the hours have increased by 4.5 million to 1.05 billion hours, and that is an increase of 2.7 million hours pre-COVID. So it says people are working longer and people are working more from there. According to total jobs, the average time it takes to hire has decreased from 6.4 to 5.8 weeks. However, the market trends on recruitment, according to total jobs, is medical and health are the top demand for jobs with 46%, transport with 44%, marketing and media with 40%, and construction with 38%, and legal with 38%. IT is only down at 28%. However, the industries that are most confident in recruiting are IT and telecoms at 74%, and media and marketing at 74%, and construction at 72%. And according to KPMG, the UK economy will escape, because we talked last time, didn't we, Neil, about recession, will escape recession. And they think there's a better outlook due to the energy prices dropping, and there's a more resilient global environment, and that continues to tighten the labour market. And they expect the growth to remain weak through this year, and the GDP will be just at 0.3%. In 2023 and rising to 1.1% in 2024. So some interesting facts there, Neil. We've talked about this quite a lot just recently, and I want to sort of look at what is happening with the recruitment market, because we're finding recruitment companies in the same niche are experiencing completely different things, and trends seem to be sort of going up, going down. It's sort of quite confusing for quite a lot of people. So Neil, welcome. Thanks for your time today. It's always a pleasure to have you on board. And so we hope you can help us outline what's actually happening in the recruitment market. So let's get stuck into our first question. Last time you appeared on the webinar was just before the spring statement. And as we head towards the next general election, what do you think the impact on the autumn statement will have on our industry?
So I think the big question in the UK is about the fiscal position. And I don't know if anyone joined our conference earlier in the month. We had Andy Verity, the BBC economics correspondent, on it. If you didn't, don't worry. There's a kind of video highlights of the day that's coming out later this week, and you can dig into Andy's interview there. And he made the point that essentially what has been happening for a long time now is basically since 2010 is the rebuilding of the public sector balance sheet at the expense of the private sector balance sheet. And what that means is actually, while you get a lot of chat about how bad the public finances are, in the context of the wider economy, they're actually not that bad. remember that pay at 7% and frozen tax brackets means the income tax take is going up. So you saw the public sector borrowing requirement undershoot on the downside by quite a significant amount in June. So yeah, don't believe the narrative that there's no money in the public sector. It's tight, it's difficult, there's a lot of interest to pay, but obviously the interest bill also goes down as inflation goes down. And I think the Chancellor doesn't have masses of wiggle room, but probably has more than the kind of public debate allows for right now. And I'll point to our survey that's out this morning, our Jobs Outlook survey, which is our survey of companies who are REC members' clients. So 500 businesses around the country matched to the shape and size of the economy. And what that says is that over the last 3 or 4 months, corporates have got steadily more confident about investing and hiring in their business. But they remain pretty heavily negative about the outlook for the wider economy. Now, that always happens actually when things improve, because, I know the REC pretty well. I'm pretty confident in our plan, but do I know those guys' plan and how they're going to do? No. And I can see inflation and all these other issues. But I do think that gives a bit of life to the narrative we're seeing coming out of the city a bit now, which is that Western economies are heading for more of a soft landing than a hard landing. So you talk about the KPMG report, Howard, 0.3% growth. That's about what the bank's aiming for, because, as I said the last time I was on, the bank will squash growth to get inflation down. They're going to keep raising interest rates until they're hitting about that 0.3 level. So from our point of view, you've got chancellors going into the autumn statement thinking, I've got a bit of wiggle room. Right, now apply political thinking to what you do with wiggle room less than a year before a general election. So I think that we're going to get a lot of retail politics. What that says is, the focus at the REC and for us in the industry is, let's get some short-term stuff right. So what can we do that can be positioned as taking the brakes off the economy as we go into 24? So we're putting lots of effort into things like, what barriers can we reduce? We've done a lot of lobbying around, for instance, the treatment of agency workers in some of the employment law reforms that the government are making at the moment. But in terms of big things, I think look to tax rather than anything else at this stage. I think the big stuff comes after the election, almost who wins. It doesn't matter who wins, but if it goes the way it seems to be, which is kind of clearly Labour much more in front and likelier to win, then we know they're committed to industrial strategy. So we had a good session with REC members and Angela Rayner last week, where we're talking about the long-term stuff then. So as you go into the autumn statement, think short-term, think tax, think levers you can pull now. And then the bigger stuff about reshaping how we're regulated, the technology impact on the sector, and the government's role in that. Things like, how do you reform public sector recruitment to treat suppliers properly? All of that really is about rolling the pitch now for things that will happen after the general election, I suspect.
Anyone got anything to add to that, or because that's a really sort of in-depth sort of conversation to start with?
Very difficult. I mean, Neil, obviously, when you were
talk too much, Heather. So
Neil, when you were here last time out, you were talking obviously about the this year being pretty slow as far as perms. I think your expression was it was a bit of a year, as I think was the exact expression. You also said, though, that as we move towards the back end of 2023, you could see things very slowly and gradually improving. And Howard made reference to the situation regarding the volume of jobs still available in this country. Has your attitude towards the permanent market changed in any way?
I think it's probably that process of things improving is probably a little slower than I anticipated, just because inflation is stuck higher for longer. But actually, if you look at, again, our Jobs Outlook survey this morning, it's certainly the case that the kind of medium-term outlook, so what am I doing with perm is 4 to 12 months out for clients, has dropped, but it's still growing. So I think what I think I see in this story is a bunch of companies who believe in what they're doing, and what they're looking for is a bit of price and cost of capital stability, which is what the bank's trying to give them, although painfully. And they're looking for some demand stability. If those two things happen, I think there is cash there. And let's remember that the UK looks cheap as an investment destination now by comparison with other markets around the world, because of the relative position of currencies. So I do think that there's potential. I was quite struck by the note that came out of one of the analysts in the city when they came off the Randstad call yesterday with analysts, where they said, in reality, and it was a comment that Randstad CFO had made, in the perm market is normalizing after a completely weird 3 years. Okay, and I think we've talked before about there are 2021 other years that aren't 2022 in the perm market, and we need not to normalize 2022. The question is only, how does this market normalize? I mean, Howard talked earlier about vacancy levels in the economy. The big thing I'm watching now is how much of those vacancies dropping is just basically returning to pre-pandemic norms in that kind of 800,000 range in the ONS stats, and how much of it is actually elevated because of structural labour and skill shortages in the UK economy. Now, I regard those as economic problems and commercial opportunities for our industry. And I'm never one to be shy about promoting my own work. So there's a great report that my good friend Tony Wilson and the IES put out yesterday that looks at this over the long haul, and it's a commission that I put some time into, and so is Carmen Watson at Pertemps actually, looking at the trend. And the trend says that the labour market for perm jobs in the UK stays tight for a long time because of demographics, because of skills changes. And therefore, coming back to that word of niche, if you get into the right niche, the demand should be there across the cycle, which again is that piece around how do we raise ourselves into the professional services world, where we're helping clients navigate what is a challenging position, because the loose labour supply of the 80s, 90s, 2000s is gone for at least 20 years.
So if we look at the next question, and I think you've answered quite a lot of this question as Paul's interjected in there, is we're seeing lots of mixed messages across the board. And as we said, the ONS has said the job levels have dropped for 12 consecutive months, but now just above the million mark. But that's 230 odd thousand up on the same period just before the pandemic came out. So you've given us the reasons why. So what are your predictions for the second half of this year on job numbers, and the facts that contribute to the UK market? What does that look like then for the second half of the year for you?
I don't think we've found the bottom of the cycle on vacancies yet. So I do think we're still normalising in the perm market. And as we normalise in the perm market, we'll stay kind of in this flat to slightly growing position in the temp market. And today's jobs outlook says that 4 to 12 months out, clients are looking at doing a bit less temp. Well, they have to think about doing a bit less temp at some stage, because the temp market's been growing in our billings data for 3 straight years now, and not at kind of a little bit. In the early stages of that growth, a lot, and now it's growing at a little bit. So there'll be some. I think there might be some swing back from temp to perm as we kind of get a clearer picture of where the economy is. I think temp though remains strong, almost in perpetuity now, because we live in a market where the model's changed. So for me, I think this kind of treacle, I think that's the word I'd use, this kind of not bad but hard market in perm probably has another few months to run, and then I think things turn. Temp, I think there's a kind of normalization question there too, which is, how do you make sure that this massive temp market you've built up over the last 3 years is sustainable in the new world? And there I'd watch the impact of technology on what your temps do, particularly. There's a great piece of research out of the US that's referenced. It was referenced at our conference, and we picked up in our recent report on recruiters and adapting to the tech change that's coming, that your good colleague Tim Sykes helped us with. There's a piece there about how do we understand that the jobs our temps do in logistics, in warehousing, in driving, are going to change fundamentally, and are actually more open to change from technology than the kind of average across the labour market. And again, that's about, you know, building those client relationships and having the discussion with the client about, well, where's your technology going? Where does our technology need to go? And how are we managing the workforce across into that? Which again is that kind of professional services strategic piece. But, you know, I'm an optimist about where things are for the industry, because I see lots of challenges, but lots of opportunities, because that's a real, you know, partially because, of course, I'm paid to be optimistic about recruitment, but also, you know, as a labour market economist of kind of 25 years standing, I only see that the firms who get it right at this moment have massive opportunities.
I've just had a request from one of the guests, so one of the attendees, that can we have a link to that report, or is there a link somewhere for that report?
The tech report, yeah, it's available on the REC website now for members. And as always, I might, you know, if you pay a subscription, you get stuff. But there may also be there's some stuff on the website for non-members as well. And there are. Let's put it this way: if you're coming to Rec Expo in October, you're basically going to get it from me from the platform as well.
So she's saying she's a member. She is a member. She is a member.
Excellent. Well, just log in on the website then, Don.
So moving forward, then there are emerging trends, obviously, or there are innovation approaches in recruitment. You know, what are you seeing that is providing success now and in the future as we start to move into this new sort of recruitment age?
That's a good question. I think I can see a parallel when we think about tech and we think about labour supply from what we've seen in skills over the last 20 years. So if you jump back, where are we, 2023, 17 years now to the Leach Review of Skills. One of the things it says is skills is a derived demand. And it derives from management decisions. You make a decision about how you structure your business. You make a decision about what you put to labour and what you put to capital. You make a decision about how you then train people. And ironically, having concluded that in 2006, the British government then proceeded to ignore it for the next 17 years, which is why we're in on the apprenticeship levy and everything else. But if I start on that, I'll be here for about 3.5 hours. But the same is true for us. And I think the critical thing for recruiters is don't think about what technology do I need to buy. Don't think about what is the service I want to give my clients and the journey I want to give my candidates. Why is that going to be more attractive than what they do now or what competitors can offer? And then what technology will I use to enable that? So, you know, one of the quotes that we use in the tech report actually from Tim Cook of Engage is a piece around, you know, the trouble with recruitment technology is it's just selling you stuff that makes consultants marginally more effective at what they do now, rather than transforming the client and candidate journey. So there's a big bit here about deciding what you want your business to be, making that digital, and training and change managing your people to use that technology. That, for me, is the biggest single challenge we face as an industry, which is how we grasp this moment. And that hurdle is a high hurdle because we know what our industry is like. It's make your numbers on Friday. And that's not to be dismissive of that, because that really matters. So there's a bit for leaders. It's why value the work you guys do and others across the industry, for leaders of recruitment businesses to think, where's my hour, half hour, where I'm just thinking, what is the business model of this business? What does it need? And what's the tech spend and the people strategy that I need to flow from that? Because I think we tend too often to approach it from the ground up. We need a CRM, right? Let's go and talk to Bullhorn or whoever. Well, fine, but is that is that supporting the data strategy we want to have as a business? And who's advising us on that data strategy? Because if it's the vendor, their interests aren't my interests, they're the vendor's interests. So there's a whole slew there of things there about thinking about using the data we've got to start to challenge our own assumptions, and I think really importantly to see the things we find it convenient not to see.
It's interesting, isn't it? So as you were talking before, you were talking about some of the government policies and things like that. So in your view, what government policies or government initiatives could be implemented to address the challenges posed by the complicated and complex recruitment market that we have at the moment? It's a difficult question when it all goes quiet.
No, I'll tell you why I went quiet, which is because I've got a new office, which, as I was saying to you before, is full of this fantastic comms equipment that is not yet set up for use. So you're just getting the laptop mic, and you dropped halfway through it.
Right, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So you were talking before about some of the government policies that should be coming in, but obviously there's a general election. But what government policies and initiatives could be implemented to address the challenges posed by this sort of complex and complicated recruitment market?
So let's start with the core underlying assumption about the labour market. I'm going to shock you all by saying that Whitehall and Westminster does not understand how the British labour market works. I know, you cannot believe it. And just explaining the difference between an agency worker and a directly employed 0 hours contract worker is a challenge. I spent a couple of weeks recently trying to explain in words of word syllable to the Department for Business at ministerial level why you shouldn't be giving an agency worker a right to request a permanent contract from their employer's client, and how that might interact with the 2003 conduct regs. So there's a whole piece there about how do people work now, and challenging some assumptions about, well, surely everyone would want to work like a civil servant, and that the answer is more law. So for me, the answer is not more law, it's effective law. So we've got a couple of strands on this. One is, how do you take this great big book of, Butterworth's employment law handbooks about this thing there? How do you take that body of law and make it effective for people who don't work like civil servants? How do you properly enforce the law that we have before we start passing more? And I think for recruiters who are trying to do things the right way, that really matters. There's a certain amount the REC can do on standards, but we're about good practice. Legal enforcement has to be delivered by EES, and there's a lot going on, obviously, in that regard at the moment in terms of how you effectively regulate umbrella companies. But beyond that, the other thing that government can do is just accept its stewardship of the labour market. So I'll give you a classic example. The BBC did some great work on this, which I'm claiming credit for, because the guys here all laugh whenever they talk about labour market supply, because they think it's funny that I think it's all about buses. But I've been doing labour market economics for 20 years, right? Most people in Britain find their jobs via Facebook, and buses really matter. Though once you accept those two truths, you know a lot about it. And so the BBC did this piece about Stoke and bus cutbacks. So if you run a restaurant in Stoke and you rely on the classic sort of early career or student working waiting staff, and they cut the last bus back from 11:30 to 7 o'clock, what's just happened to your labour supply? If you can't get childcare, what's happened to your labour supply? Increasingly, if you employ grandparents why are you suddenly getting part-time working requests? Tell you why, because they are taking time out of their jobs to make sure that their kids who are parents can work full time, because the childcare is like if you are a company looking at investing in the UK, go and look at what Invest in France will give you to build a factory to do wind turbines, for instance, in Cherbourg, and then compare and contrast what you get in the UK. There's a whole slew of things there that I would put under the heading of industrial strategy, which isn't about making loads of cars. It's about making Britain a really good place to invest and helping people get to work. And to be honest, the biggest single thing any government could do coming to power is to start making sensible long-term decisions over decisions that sound good in the short term. Classic example of this, love or loathe HS2, love or loathe it, is Euston is now, the Euston Station tunnel project for HS2 is now under attack because it costs too much. It costs too much because it's been redesigned 5 times, because the government has had it redesigned 5 times. They just built the blinking thing at the beginning, it wouldn't cost as much. And so there's a whole thing about political interference and economic planning, and none of this is about the controlled economy. But we have to be honest with ourselves as a country. China's a planned economy. Europe has sheer heft because of the single market. Under Biden, the United States is effectively an interventionist economy. If we're going to compete, we need, frankly, our politicians to go up a bit.
It was interesting, wasn't it? Because I spent some time about a month ago with one of the Barclays analysts, and he was talking about the HS2 projects, because we were talking about it now not coming to Leeds. And he said if they took that money that was now labelled for the Yorkshire part of that and put that into the infrastructure, as in the road infrastructure around Leeds, Sheffield, etc., he said it would bring 5 times much more money to each of those areas than HS2 would ever bring.
Yeah, but it wouldn't help Newcastle. So, you know, the thing about that is, go and look at the metro systems of French regional cities. Yeah. Why? When's the Leeds tram happening exactly?
It's been happening for the last 20 years. It was like the Edinburgh tram system, wasn't it? It happened, and then it did, and then it did. Yeah.
The government will routinely spend more on a single motorway junction than Andy Burnham wants for the station that unlocks Manchester. So there's a really big thing about kind of understanding that the role of government spending is to crowd in private capital. It's not I spend this and I get no return for it. It's I spend this and I get return off what the private sector does. Because the real point of the HS2 line to Leeds is to take the journey from the West Midlands to West Yorkshire down from 2.5 hours to an hour. Yeah. Because in terms of industrial linkages, that's really powerful. So that long-term thing, that's where I spent a lot of time this spring, partially because of course the CBI has imploded, although it does now seem to be on the way back. I spent a lot of time this spring with a group of 9 other chief execs of the largest trade associations trying to drive this stuff with government. And I think broadly, when they're thinking long-term, they get it, but they're not in the mood for it just yet. But you know what's really nice is, you know, recruiters are now seen as a key sector in the economy and government. You know, there are 10 trade associations who are in that core group, and the REC is one of them. And I think that's a great place for us to be. And I think largely it reflects the fact that people across the economy are now thinking about people issues as strategic in a way that they haven't had to, perhaps, for the last couple of decades.
So if we move that on a little bit, what long-term implications might challenge the recruitment market we have on the overall UK economy and workforce, considering 2021, it was only sort of 4 or 5 months ago, we were claiming 2021, we generated £42.9 billion for the UK economy, and that was at the time expected to grow by 7.4% in 2022. So what long-term impact on recruitment market as a whole is going to happen?
So I still see it's a growing market. We're going, for REC members on the call, the survey is going into the field over the next few weeks, so please fill it in. I think for us, there's a short and a long term here, right? The short term is I think we continue to demonstrate what we showed in the recruitment for recovery work that we did back in 2021, that there are downstream benefits to corporates in terms of their growth, their profit, their ability to compete from getting their recruitment and retention right, driven by working with recruiters. The longer term piece then is in a market where labour supply is tight, growth will be driven, sorry, I'm a bit wonkish, growth will be driven by the efficiency of the transaction. So how do you get the people, the skills they need to the vacancy they need to fill with the companies with the growth potential? And a bit of that is about making sure that this industrial strategy doesn't pick winners, because when you pick winners, you tend to be trying to keep businesses on life support. That it's much more about investment choices, and that we keep investing in as recruiters in our ability to source from different candidate pools. We look at some of this really innovative hire, train, deploy stuff that's now taking off, where it's not hire, train, deploy where you pay your training in a way that maybe it was a few years ago. That kind of solution making, you know, we've got REC members who are training nurses now and things like that. I think the more we can get into that solutions business, the more we can have a positive economic impact, and it's enlightened self-interest.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you sort of look at it in that way? The UK market is, as we sort of looked at, is the third biggest in the world. So how does the UK job market compare to other countries at this moment in time? What are we seeing globally? Because we always say that, you know, what happens in the US, we catch that 6 months later. So what's happening globally in the marketplace?
I think actually the picture is reasonably consistent in the developed economies. So employment rates generally have recovered. The UK has always had a high employment rate by comparison with other countries. We're back there. We've got low unemployment. The US has probably normalized a bit more post-pandemic, as Randstad were saying earlier in the week, than we have, because they've just been out of it a bit longer. So broadly, I think the stories in the short term are relatively similar. Where there is some differentiation, well, inflation is not where inflation is in the UK and lots of these countries now. If you look at the US, you look at Spain, inflation has come down. So that means that there's potentially greater animus to invest earlier there. There's also less pressure on wages in those countries than there is currently in the UK. The other big challenge is demography, and you know, I know I bore you all with the fact that it's what happens when the baby boomers retire or form advisory groups that really occupies the mind. But it is, you know, back to that Institute for Employment Studies stuff we published yesterday. It is the defining factor in the European labour markets. Less so in the United States, where I think they have a much more open immigration policy, despite what you hear, and B, they have a younger population generally.
So it's interesting, isn't it? But the market is moving all the time, and as we know, when recruitment hits hard times, you know, recruitment gets a poor reputation for shoddy practice, and we're great at dropping our rates to gain market share. So if we look at the REC, what's the REC doing to help agencies gain a better reputation in the market, to help stabilize and improve sort of fees and rates in the long term, and really sort of, you know, if we're creating 42.9 billion for the UK economy, that we're actually seen as a genuine asset in the recruitment market, or in the UK economy market?
Such a good question, Howard. I mean, a really good discussion about this when we were together in Leeds the other week.
We did.
With members. So a few bits. Before we kind of accept the prior there of, you know, we're not valued, I think the world's moved on a bit. I don't think we'd have got through the pandemic 15 years ago without kind of being dragged through the mud on the experience of temps and furlough and all of that. I think the industry handled that really, really well. Now, I have to say I have written, or am writing rather, to the COVID inquiry, because I can see the DH pointing the finger at recruiters in the care sector in due course as it tries to shovel blame off to whoever for its own failings. But actually, we've got a robust story to tell there. I think, Don's question about are we the necessary evil? Well, that is an interesting question. I don't think anyone likes paying their suppliers cash, but it's always a question of value. So I'd go slightly differently to how Don's phrased it in the chat. I'd say the question is this: no one wants to hire a lawyer. People are lawyers, but they don't hire the cheapest one, do they? They hire the good one, or the one they think is good. So there's something there about how do we get people to understand value and buy on value. So one of the things the REC is doing this autumn is we're putting together some stuff to put into members' hands and to use ourselves on how to buy it well. And it's exactly it's a kind of client-focused version of what we're doing in the advocacy strategy, which is trying to get them to think long-term about, as Mark Carberry would say, a stitch in time saves 9. It's that piece around making sure you get your strategy right up front. Now, we've done some stuff on that before, but actually I think we need to be, in this market, in this environment, got a real opportunity to be robust with clients. We did that last year in Overcoming Shortages. One of the things that's really helped us with the government, actually, in our Overcoming Shortages campaign, is being able to sit down and go, yeah, we've published this analysis about how we take on the labour supply crisis in this country, and 2/3 of the recommendations aren't for you. Ministers love that, because they like things being other people's point. But 2/3 of the recommendations are actually for businesses. So and I think they touch on businesses' pain points. So the question is then, how do we help businesses understand that they resolve their pain points by working more effectively with their recruiters and helping them add value? And that's what we're doing this autumn. So we slightly sat on it a bit because we wanted to get this tech stuff we were talking about earlier out the door before the summer. But in the autumn, the big 3 focuses on the new production side here are: 1, getting our EDI support up and running and off the ground. Olga Franchak and our team here has done fantastic work on that. It's about revising our professional pathway to take account for the fact that recruiters' jobs are changing shape, and we need to help shape that with our professional development and our standards expectations. But it's also this thing about how we talk directly to clients as the REC, but also how do we give REC members some tools to show their clients. Because, going back to furlough, one of the things that I always recall is that sometimes a member needs a letter that has our logo on it, not just a letter with their logo on it, because if someone else says it's got some clarity. So we're going to do lots of work around that. And in reality, I think I've said this to you before, Howard, in reality, our press strategy is really about reaching businesses, not about reaching government. We don't need to do our business with government in the press, unless it's slagging off their decision to abandon the rules on agency workers and strikes. But I might have warned them that a year ago that they'd probably get it slapped down in the Court of Appeal.
Did they listen? Did they listen?
So one, I'm very glad we got to where we got to, and it's been actually really useful for us in terms of positioning with the Labour Party. But objectively, that judgment is hilarious. And if you really want to understand how much a judge can be dismissive of a Secretary of State, have a read about it. Read of that. And Gordon's comment in the chat, I could not agree more with. Actually, the worst people for talking down our industry are us. Yeah.
Yep.
So just don't accept the prior, right? Take the chip off the shoulder. We do great work. Head up. What do I always say? Expo, head up, shoulders back. Smash it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's interesting in the training that I provide to certain clients on selling your services to clients. I said the problem that we've got is that every recruitment agency claims that every other recruitment agency is shoddy or a cowboy. So we're just self-cannibalizing ourselves rather than we should be talking about our services and how we can improve our services. And it's then talking as groups of recruitment agencies, as we had the other week in Leeds, talking about how we improve it as a whole going forward and promoting that as a whole. And I think that's about the reputation. And I think certain clients have already, as you said, through COVID times, have got to understand the importance of creating a true relationship with recruiters. And that goes to then having that discussion about what's their workforce planning over the next 12 months rather than what's your workforce planning today. Because that's what every recruitment gets, is what's happening today rather than what's happening over the 12 months time. So we can then build a better pipeline and help them immobilize their staff quicker and faster.
And being willing to kind of choose the ones you want to go along with.
Yeah.
Pick the ones that are ready to have that conversation, and be really honest with the others, which is we're doing this with these clients, and if we make this work, we're not going to want to work like this in 6-9 months time.
So the final question, and it's a question I asked last time. What's your advice to recruitment owners? Was the last question, but as we enter the second half of the year. So what's your advice now for recruitment owners? What should they be really focusing on?
So I'm not a fan of quoting the tech bros. I'm a massive kind of skeptic of the Silicon Valley view of the world, which tends, in my experience, to fall on its face when it comes face to face with real people. But there's a Bill Gates quote I really like, which is we always tend to overestimate the amount of change that will happen in the next 2 years and underestimate the amount of change that will happen in the next 10. And I think that the risk for recruitment agency owners is actually, if you look after the engine you've got, be fine for the next couple of years. Plenty of demand out there, tight labour market, perm will bounce, it's be fine. Might not have a business in 5 or 6 years' time though. So it's that thing about carving the slice of time out. Who's my tech advisor, and do I have an agency problem with them? Who do they have the skills, and who's their loyalty to? Am I thinking about how I change the employment pattern in the industry? I mean, one of the things that's happening at the moment, for instance, in the apprenticeship space, is that the resourcer and recruiter apprenticeships are being merged. And that's because the resourcer job, can they tell the difference between that and a consultant with the tools that we've got? So there's a whole piece there about how you're carving space out for things that may only marginally affect your numbers this year, but might be kind of business survivability critical in 3 or 4 years' time, especially if you're thinking about, either a business you want to run as a lifestyle business to retirement, or a business where you're thinking about an exit. I think that, people who are looking at investment or purchase are interested in your future profitability, not your profitability now. So, get that kind of slice of thinking done. And join the REC if you haven't.
Good little pitch at the end there, Neil. We don't often allow our clients to pitch
Look,
our
do you
webinars.
like this? Isn't this subtle?
It's always interesting having a conversation. It's always interesting sort of splitting it between the months of the year and seeing how things have changed. And it's interesting how sort of recruitment has changed over the last 6 months. And you're right in what you're saying there. Yeah, I think recruitment agencies, because our clients push us to see what's happening today, very seldom look what's happening tomorrow and what can affect tomorrow, and having that long-term view, not just what's happening the next 3 months, 6 months, but looking at the next 3-4 years, is a real important thing for survival. And as technology changes, as the way clients buy, and I think that's the biggest thing, the way clients are buying services is very different to the way the recruitment agencies are selling their services to them. And there's a big mismatch. And those agencies that are now selling in a more commercial way are getting far more out of their clients, because the clients understand what value they're buying and what value actually brings to the business, and that's a long-term strategy rather than a short-term strategy. I think that's an absolute prime comment to take away, that it's not about what's happening today in the next 3 months, it's what's happening in the next 3 years that will make the business survive from there. So
And
Neil, thank you very much.
To a certain extent, just to pitch on that, that's actually where kind of our role comes in and your role comes in. Because the thing that unites Jump and the REC is we don't have other stakeholders to worry about. You know, I always say to REC members, it's your organization, you're the customers, you're also the shareholders. And you sit in the same sort of position. And I think that's really important.
As always, Neil, it's always an enlightening and an interesting, and 45 minutes never seems long enough. It seems to go so quickly from there. But I know you're a really tight schedule at the moment today, and you're jumping from meeting to meeting. So thank you for coming in. For those who don't know, we normally get on course for an hour before the webinar. Neil joined at 45 seconds before the webinar was due to go live. So we were all sort of thinking, right, who's going who's going to do the introduction and who's going to be Neil? So from that point of view. So thanks very much. Great insight, and so greatly appreciated. So thank you very much.
I just hope it wasn't Jacobs, because I've heard his attempted Scottish accent and it's not good.
It's not the best.
It's a shock. We were all there at the time. My
English accent's bad enough, let alone my Scottish accent.
Correct. We were all there at that time. It was a shocking performance from Mr. Jacobs. But thank you. As I say, great input, and I hope people have really learned a lot from that. For everybody listening, this is the last webinar for this half of the year. We're going to take a break over August so everyone can go on holiday and enjoy themselves. So Neil, thank you very much. For everybody else, we will see you back in September. Rest of the Jump team, I'll speak to you soon. Cheers, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Bye, everybody.